Hi there, welcome back to Overy Gardens. Now as the garden begins to wind down at the end of the year, it's a really good time to take stock and maybe think about planting and expanding areas of your garden. Now the really good thing about planting in late autumn into winter and even into early spring is that you can really diversify the ways that you plant. So most of the time when we buy a plant, it will come in a pot with compost and it's actively growing. Now whilst that is successful, it's not as effective as planting when the plants are dormant. And this is called bare root planting. Now I think bare root, it can be quite confusing and quite scary for a lot of people because, I mean, bare rooting planting is exactly what it is. It's a plant that is dormant and its roots are not in soil, they are exposed. And so for a lot of people that does put people off. But I just want to show you what that is because I don't think a lot of people kind of grasp what bare root plants look like and actually how to handle them. So I've got a little patch here which I'm just trying to expand a raspberry border. So this is how bare root plants will arrive. And these are raspberry canes. And you can see they are plants that are basically a stick on top of a bundle of roots. And it can look quite unusual and it can almost seem like, how does that become a plant? But you can see these raspberry canes are just completely dormant. This one has got barely no roots on it, but that will be absolutely fine. Some of them have got more roots than others, and that's basically because these are plants that are grown in a nursery. They're lifted when they're dormant, so basically from November onwards, they're wrapped up and they're sent to you. Now, the good thing about doing this is that you can leave these plants in their packaging for quite a long time. They're pretty resilient. So although it looks quite exposed and quite brutal, if I wasn't ready to plant, because this time of year it gets quite frosty, so don't really want to plant in frosted ground, you can leave these for weeks at a time. Ideally you wouldn't, but sometimes it's not possible to plant them. So if you're waiting to plant, bare root is the best way to put the plant in a cool garage or shed, leave it there in the packaging, and they'll be absolutely fine. And when you are ready to plant, which I am now, unpack them, put them in a bucket of water, which is what I've done, for about half an hour. You can do it longer. So typically for shrubs and larger plants, leave them soaking for about 24 hours before planting if you know you're going to be planting the day after. But if not, just if you spur the moment want to plant, put them in a bucket of water, and that will just rehydrate the roots. And what it will mean is that the plant will establish and be much happier when you put it into the ground. So, like I said, I've got raspberry canes here, but to be honest with you, this could be any plant. When they're bare root, they are literally just stems. So it doesn't really matter what the plant is. The principle is the same for bare roots. And the first thing I do is just separate them. So, and just don't really pay much heed to what's on the top. The top growth, it's not irrelevant, but it's not as important as what's underneath, and that is the root. So you can see here, that's a really good root system. And with raspberries, it's quite interesting because they send these roots out and they pop up everywhere. So when the roots get in, they will spread out and they'll pop up everywhere. So when you are planting raspberries, just consider planting them in a secure area so they don't start popping up in places where you don't want them. And I've got a bed here which is brick edged, so they'll be contained. So when these roots do this, you can see it doesn't matter where they pop up because there'll be a barrier. Now, with the roots, to make it easier to plant, you can actually trim them. So because they're dormant, there's no stress on the plant, and you can just give them a trim and accommodate the roots to the planting hole that you're trying to do. And with the top growth, as I said, because it's not that important, you can trim that off as well. So I normally leave a little stump just so you can see where the plant is, because all the action for raspberries is going to come next year from the bottom of the plant, from the crown. That new growth is going to be what we want. So that top growth from last year, it's just there basically to show you where the top of the plant is, to differentiate from the roots. And it's a good idea to cut most plants back when you're planting them, just so that they put all their energy into growing down roots, because these plants are going to be sitting in the winter, and when it begins to warm up, rather than trying to keep alive top growth, you want the plant to really establish a good root system. So you just want to minimize the stress on the plant in that period. So now that I've basically tidied that plant up, it's got a lovely root system, I can now dig a hole and put it in, and it's really simple. You can see often when they're bare root, the nursery line, so where the plant was planted in its field, and you can kind of see roughly just where these little nodules, these little shoots are beginning to pop. That is the level of the plant. So it's much easier to see where the crown of the plant is in a pot. But with a bare root plant, you have to look for a soil line on the plant, and I can just see that there. So that's the level you want to go to. Now, I've got a spade, so I'll just dig a simple hole, fluff the soil up, because what you want is nice open soil. If you dig into a compacted soil and just dig a hole, it'll just act as a sump where all the water will accumulate, and over the winter these plants are more susceptible to rotting. So you want a nice friable soil, and for the hole to be consistent throughout. You don't want just to dig an isolated hole with a compact edge. You want to fluff the area up, and it also makes it easier for the roots to penetrate into the soil and establish much quicker. So I've got a nice cultivated border here, because this is grown for fruit and vegetables, so it's got loads of organic matter mixed in. I always avoid mixing or putting organic matter into the planting hole. Same principle, it just means that the roots want to stay there. If you have an evenly fertilised border, the roots will spread out into it and the plant will be much stronger. If you just isolate all those nutrients and goodness into the hole, the roots will just sit there and the plant won't be as resilient and as strong. So I've got nice soil here. Now, raspberries are pretty resilient. They grow pretty much anywhere. They like mostly sunny conditions and they appreciate moisture. So as long as they're not waterlogged, this is perfect. Nice, bulky, organic, rich soil. They'll absolutely thrive. It's got lots of sun. So I've got a little hole there, got my bare root plant. Line it up, and you just want to make sure that the level where you want to plant it is level with the top of the soil. And as you begin to backfill, do it a little bit at a time and just give the plant a shake. And as you're doing that, it just all the soil particles and sediments just drop in between the gaps of the roots. If you just pile all the soil in, often you get air gaps, the plant will sink. But if you just do it bit by bit and just shake the plant, the roots really settle around the plant, around the roots, the soil will fill in all those air gaps and it will be much easier to plant. So as I'm just filling in those particles, bit of rubbish there, I'm just easing it in, give it a shake. And once it's level, just give it a bit of a tidy up and just gently firm it in. Don't tramp on it. Just give it a nice little shake and that'd be absolutely fine. Now, I would water this if it's really dry. So I'll just use some of the water here. I've not got a watering can handy, but I can just give it a little bit of water there, just to settle it in. And what that will mean is all the roots are in contact with the soil and those roots will spread out into the soil much more effectively. If it was going to rain or if it was raining, you could leave it, but it's always good practice just to give it a bit of water, just to settle the plant in. And that's all there is to it. If it's a really hungry plant, it's really worthwhile mulching it with a good compost. Like I said, just a layer of compost around the top, not in contact with the plant, but just on top of the plant, around it where you've planted it, and that will just lock in the moisture, lock in the goodness, and that soil will break down and feed slowly over time the plant. So bare root planting, hopefully, that's an example of just how simple it can be, and we're really busy at this time of year doing this sort of thing, so it's a really worthwhile practice. Often you'll find a wide variety of plants online, and they're much cheaper when they're bare root because they're not being shipped or bought with soil and compost and pots. They're just literally twigs essentially, and they're much more, there's a much higher success ratio because they're dormant. So as long as they're not going to rot or get overly frosted, which in this country, most of the plants that we're going to be planting will be resilient and very hardy. So they'll be dormant, you haven't got to worry about them. Keep an eye on them in sort of February time when the buds begin to burst. And that's when you may start to begin watering and beginning the more intense looking after of the plant, because it's obviously going to be in active growth. So bare root plants, really good idea to get them in now. You've got until March, even April, depending on the weather, to get that bare root season active and busy. So absolutely worth doing if you are looking to increase your plant stocks.